Hi everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with a special Judicial Watch presentation on investigating the investigators. We have an expert panel here today to talk about the issue. For those of you who don't know, Judicial Watch is a nonpartisan educational foundation that investigates and uncovers government corruption. We are second to none in using the Freedom of Information Act to uncover what the government's been up to, and we've taken the lead in exposing the Spygate targeting of President Trump, the deep state attacks on President Trump through Spygate, and on top of that, we have the many lawsuits on the Mueller investigation and what's behind that. With the collapse of the Mueller report, or the collapse of the Mueller investigation, now people are wanting to uncover what has been going on with the targeting of President Trump and the attacks on our Republican form of government through the illicit use of the spy agencies targeting President Trump and other innocent, what I believe to be crime victims. Judicial Watch has nearly 50 lawsuits to expose this most massive corruption scandal in American history, and without that pressure, we're convinced that efforts to educate the American people on this and expose what went on would never take place otherwise. Congress obviously has been defanged because they're part of the problem now, and the administration is facing internal pressure not to release key information about the misconduct of the Obama administration and, frankly, Trump administration officials that continued the effort to overthrow the president. And with that, I'm going to open up our panel with the introductions. Joining us first here is Dr. Carter Page, who's founder and managing partner of Global Natural Gas Ventures. You may know Carter Page, obviously, as the target of those illicit FISA warrants used by both the Obama administration and the Trump Justice Department to spy on not only Mr. Page, but indirectly the Trump campaign. Dr. Page has decades of experience as a foreign policy scholar, including a 6-year term as a fellow at the Center for National Policy, where he focused on energy and foreign policy issues. He was a former Navy officer, had the top-level security clearance as well, and a graduate of Annapolis, so we're lucky to have him here. Victoria Tenzing is a founding partner of the Washington, D.C. law firm of DeGeneva and Tenzing. She is an internationally known expert on white-collar crime, terrorism, national security, and intelligence matters. And yes, she actually used to obtain FISA warrants when she worked at the Justice Department. So of all the people you see talking on TV, I think there's only maybe 1 or 2 have actually been involved in obtaining FISA warrants, and Victoria is one of them. Her work with her husband, Joe DeGeneva, I think is unheralded because you are representing folks that many people don't know about, you really can't talk about, who have been victimized by the deep state, not only in this specific scandal, but you've seen the way whistleblowers have been treated generally by the government over the years. Also joining us is Chuck Ross, who's a preeminent investigative reporter at the Daily Caller News Foundation, where he covered the 2016 election and the Clinton email investigation, and he's one of the leading reporters covering the Trump-Russia investigation. His work has been cited by the New York Times, Washington Post, and Fox News. And more importantly, the Daily Caller News Foundation is being represented by Judicial Watch, I think, in a few lawsuits now, trying to get documents about some of the topics we're talking about. And my colleague Chris Farrell is Director of Investigations and Research for Judicial Watch, a member of our board of directors. He previously served as a counterintelligence officer for the United States Army, where he specialized, again, in counterintelligence and human intelligence. And Chris has been with Judicial Watch for 20 years now?
20 years.
Scary. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. A lot to talk about. We've got a good hour to chunk and change to talk about it. And the way it will work is we'll make some intro remarks, and then we'll talk amongst ourselves. Carter, I'll start with you. You have a lot to say, I'm sure, but go ahead.
Well, Tom, first of all, a huge thanks to Judicial Watch. You literally have been a lifesaver, and I think as I describe some of the things that we've been through and the pathway ahead, I think that'll become clear. You've made a comment on, both in your introduction and over many months and over the last few years, that this attack, in terms of the civil rights abuses against myself, was not an attack on me. They were really trying to get at President Trump, candidate Trump, and then President-elect Trump, as a way of infiltrating his campaign. So similarly, again, I don't never view myself as a victim, but everyone on this panel, or all the organizations on this panel, were illegally surveilled. I think the first time I ever spoke or emailed with Chuck was he asked me questions in February of 2017, which was right after my first renewal. Had a few conversations with DeGeneva Totzing, the top law firm, and Judicial Watch in terms of a few conversations as well. So we're really all victims in this. So the main focus, I think, we often get focused on spying, et cetera. To me, the bigger issue, and the thing I'm more concerned of, is literally the terrorism that was associated with this. Now, terrorism, you typically think of, assassinations or explosions, but really, if you look at the statutory definition of terrorism, it includes acts that are dangerous to human life. That's sort of the basis of it. And these false reports that were paid for by the DNC and the attacks which were distributed widely to the media, I received countless death threats related to this. And I know a lot of other members of the Trump movement had the same thing, but you just go down the list of all the elements of terrorism. Violations of criminal law, I think, as we're starting to see elements of that. And it's really about intimidating or coercing a civilian population. So that's a big issue. Unfortunately, as I said, it's been great to rely on the important work that Judicial Watch has done, but I have been a supporter of the FBI and a confidential source for them for many, many years. And unfortunately, I have a small graphic here, which is off the FBI's website, which is the FBI's priorities. When you look down every single one, they literally were doing the opposite of it during the witch hunt. So first of all, protect the US from a terrorist attack. Again, literally, I had asked the FBI for help about this, and I've asked repeatedly. To the contrary, they actually, the leaks were continuing after my meetings in March 2017. Going down the list, protecting US against foreign intelligence operations. Well, we know that the DNC's conspiracy was all over that. Protecting against cyber attacks and high technology crimes. Again, we're all victims of that in terms of this illegal surveillance that was done. And combating public corruption. Again, these illicit payments, which Judicial Watch was able to uncover, not only was the DNC's consultants getting paid, but this Mr. Christopher Steele in 2016, right up to and after the election, got 11 payments from the FBI. So literally a public official who is getting these illicit payments surreptitiously. Protecting civil rights, which is a joke. Obviously our civil rights were severely violated. And then really, transnational criminal organizations. This enterprise was exactly that. And I think, going back to this Investigate the Investigator, when we talk about major white-collar crime, we should find out a lot more about that over the period to come. So, again, thank you very much for doing this, and looking forward to the discussion.
Hey, thank you, Carter. Carter probably has a few claims or two he could be pursuing. I'm sure he is already. But Victoria, thanks for joining us. We're interested in your take on the latest. And James Comey's out in the news today as well. We should address that. So a lot going on as we speak even.
I'm embarrassed that the newspapers print what he writes because it's so trivial and unsophisticated. But the present Attorney General, Bill Barr, gave a marvelous interview to Bill Hammer a couple weeks ago. And he said something amazing to me. He said, when I became AG, I had started an inquiry. I started asking questions. And I have more questions today than I had before I became Attorney General. And that just blew me away. That, why wasn't Chris Wray over there saying, here's the answers, here's the answers. So I'm going to pose some questions that I have and see if anyone knows that they've been answered. Okay, Joseph Mifsud, is he really a Western agent and not a Russian agent, as we have come to, we are being told that he's a Western agent. But the Mueller report portrays him as a Russian agent. And George Papadopoulos said that when he said he was leaving this institute and going to the Trump campaign, that a woman who worked for the US government said to him, "Oh my goodness, you have to meet Mifsud. I'll fix it up. You must do it." And yet, why did the Mueller report say that George Papadopoulos contacted Mifsud? I mean, talk about misleading. Charles Tawil, Tawil, he's also a George Papadopoulos character. He pursued George to a Greek island where he was vacationing with his then fiancée, and he begged him to come to Israel. He had a business deal. He had to get work with him. And George goes to Israel, and he goes up to the guy's hotel room, and guess what? There's $10,000 in cash on the bed. George takes it. He protests a little bit, but he says, the guy says, "This is how I do business." So George takes it. His wise fiancée, now wife, said, "Leave it here in Greece." George gets on a plane, goes to Dulles, and is immediately surrounded by FBI agents. And, you know, people say that 99% of the FBI agents are good. What happened to these rank and file people who were participating in this? I want to know. My question is, what were they told was the basis for this, stopping this man? And then they didn't have the 10 grand, so they had to make up a crime, and they put him in chains. I mean, my goodness. And they're calling back saying, "Oh my gosh, we don't have the 10 grand. Mike Flynn, who unmasked him? Who put that article in the Washington Post, because all David Ignatius is a typist for the Democratic Party? Who put that in? And it had to be a lawyer, and I'll tell you why I say that. Because the person told Ignatius to write about the Logan Act. Ignatius wouldn't know about the Logan Act, but he puts it, and I know journalists enough, you all can verify, if you're going to try to get something out there, you don't put it in the first paragraph. You bury it down so it can just be there as a little seed of destruction. That's where the Logan Act and Mike Flynn all came about. Well, who did that? And how about Andrew Wiseman? As head of the fraud section, which I was in charge of the fraud section as Deputy Assistant AG, I supervised the head of the fraud section. Why was he briefed on the dossier? It was out of his portfolio. There was no, he had no clearances.
This is before he was attended.
Thank you, Tom, for making that clear. In August of 2016, he was briefed on the dossier. And then he goes to Mueller, working with the same information that's in the dossier. Why wasn't that a conflict?
Right.
And I have my last question, and here it is. There's only two ways that I know of that the government can get information on U.S. citizens, and that is they go to NSA, which is collected. They've got all kinds of things. They've got a world full of information at NSA, and you go knock on the door and you say, "I want to know everything about Carter Page," and then I have a reason to do so. Or you can go to the FISA court and say, "I want to have surveillance on Carter Page," and then you get whatever you're producing. So when the good Mike Rogers, I call him, Admiral Rogers, went to the FISA court and found out all the violations that had started since 2012 by the Obama administration. And in April of 2016, he cut off all the FBI contractors' ability to access FISA material. Is it then, Carter, because they couldn't go knock on the door, as they had been doing, getting the information? Is it then that they started to focus on you and George for FISA warrants? And is that why it turned in the other direction?
Well, just to provide some context here, you know, Carter was a cooperator with the government. You were helping the FBI go after the Russians. Of course, this doesn't come across in the Mueller. In fact, the fact they leave it out shows you the dishonesty of the Mueller report.
Sin by omission.
And the FISA issue that you raised, the FBI contractors, explain what the issue is behind there, where you had, I guess, people who weren't read in, reviewing.
Contractors were not supposed to have access to
reviewing
702 U.S. person
reviewing
information.
spy material on Americans, right?
Yeah. And why are they still anonymous? Why don't we know who those contractors are?
So in many ways, this goes beyond even the targeting of Trump. There are others, innocents as well, even outside the Russia scandal. Chuck Ross, you're one of the few reporters who honestly reviews the primary documents out there, so I commend you for that. others just mimic talking points or just stenographers for the deep state, as I call it. But Chuck, give us your take on where we stand today and what might be coming next.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here for sure. And you mentioned earlier in your intro that you guys are representing me, Daily Caller News Foundation, in a few lawsuits. The one I'm most excited about kind of fits into this investigating the investigators theme that we have. Although it's for the State Department, so State Department aren't technically investigators, but it's a lawsuit I'm pretty excited about because we're looking at, you guys are helping us look for all the communications between Christopher Steele and State Department officials regarding the dossier, and even before. We're looking for the 100 or so reports that Christopher Steele allegedly provided the State Department to, and the State Department has claimed that Steele was a reliable source, and that kind of fed into the narrative that the FBI said that he's a reliable source, and they've used his documentation to further the collusion investigation. So really excited about that. I think that the State Department, you've had a few Republican congressmen and a few watchdogs and other people in the media point out the State Department's role, but I think they played a significant role in the early days of disseminating the dossier, disseminating Christopher Steele's work, and also at least one State Department official served as a source for the media for the infamous article about Carter Page here, the Michael Isikoff article. A guy named Jonathan Weiner was a source for that article and for subsequent articles that were intended to bolster the allegations of the dossier, which we now have been all but debunked by the Mueller report. So, I focus a lot on the dossier in my reporting. I just think it's, despite the spin that has emerged over the past couple years, I still think it's just the central document to this whole investigation. James Comey and others, and Comey in his op-ed yesterday, rehashed the argument that the dossier wasn't the spark for the investigation, which maybe that's technically true, but there are a couple of problems with that, and I think that's something that we need to look into. From my perspective as a journalist, Judicial Watch as a watchdog group, there were activities before Crossfire Hurricane kicked off. We have informants, Stefan Halper, who met with Carter here 3 weeks before the investigation formally kicked off. You had Loretta Lynch and James Comey discussing Carter actually in the spring of 2016. So this is before the investigation officially commences. They're at least thinking about looking into Carter and the campaign and other people. So we need to figure out why what happened, what was the catalyst for that. And then, as I mentioned, we have Stefan Halper, who was a longtime FBI informant, who was up to something in the weeks before Crossfire Hurricane opened. And then the dossier enters the picture, at least as far as being provided to the FBI sometime in September of 2016. So if the dossier wasn't the catalyst of Crossfire Hurricane, it was at least the engine that drove this idea that there was collusion between Trump associates and the campaign. It also has fueled, and I think this is more important actually, it's fueled the media narrative over the last 2 years. I mean, this has literally placed a cloud over the Trump administration and innocent people as well outside of the administration, Carter included. We have to look at how that came about, why the media, and I'm not saying investigate the media in terms of criminal investigation, but media watchdogs, reporters like myself need to take a harder look at what the media got wrong, why they appear to have fallen for this false narrative, and all of this is kind of with an eye on trying to prevent it from happening again. We went through a debacle in the lead up to the Iraq War, where there was false intelligence that led the drumbeats of war, and that happened. So we had to take a step back and figure out why we got into that. And there's a similar situation, I believe, here, in the sense that this information that is false was perpetuated, pushed through the media, and was used to plant a cloud over the Trump administration.
Well,
I'd like to make one legal point,
Yeah,
just
sure.
while, because Chuck just said that Steele was reliable. I practiced Fourth Amendment law for about 5 years as an assistant U.S. attorney. It's not the provider of the information that has to be reliable. It's the people that he or she gets the information from. And there was no basis to support one iota of anybody that Steele got information from was reliable.
Chuck, you kind of talked about this a little bit. I think an uncomfortable truth for the media is there's no media exception to the Espionage Act. So in my view, you had media organizations like the Washington Post and New York Times that were knowingly publishing classified information. They admitted they were publishing classified information. And the same way Julian Assange has been targeted for prosecution, these same folks arguably could be. Do I think that's going to happen or should happen? Probably not. But certainly these media entities are witnesses to crimes, and they know who the crooks are in the Obama and Trump administrations who are unlawfully leaking this classified information, targeting you and targeting Flynn and targeting President Trump and others in a way that makes them unable, I think, to fairly report on it without acknowledging this role they've had in helping this misconduct take place, this government misconduct take place. Chris, is it fair to call you a spy?
Probably,
Yeah.
yeah.
Did you spy?
I think so.
Were you a spy when you worked for the Army? Well, we're lucky to have here because here's someone who ran counterintelligence operations and who knows what the rules are and has some pretty strong opinions as to how the rules were violated. Chris Farrell, who's the Director of Investigations at Judicial Watch.
Tom, this is a great panel, and it's wonderful to have such bright, smart people who know what they're talking about instead of the usual commentators opining about things. We have folks here with direct knowledge of what was going on and how it's done. And your opening is correct. I've had the great fortune of running very successful counterespionage investigations defensively, but also offensively running double agent operations for the Army. So I'm not guessing at this. I've done it for a living. I know firsthand exactly how this is done, what the procedures are, both from a tradecraft point of view, but also the legal process standard for how these operations are, formulated, predicated, and then launched, and how they're conducted. The average citizen, I think, having seen the Mueller report, knows that something very horrible went terribly wrong, that they've been lied to. The average American citizen, just kind of even dipping into the story occasionally, knows that for 2+ years, a hoax has been perpetrated upon them, and they've been lied to and manipulated. And that's really the net of the Mueller report. Attorney General Barr has, I think, wisely and aptly described it as spying with respect to how law enforcement and the intelligence services were used in a way that I can tell you is outrageously beyond the pale, like nothing else we've ever seen in the history of the United States government. No law enforcement agencies, officers, no intelligence officers have not just sort of stretched or gone to the margin trying to aggressively pursue an operation. That I've seen, and in some cases it's entirely appropriate. But these folks are so far out of bounds and so beyond the pale. When people talk about it being a coup, there's no exaggeration there. It was a coup. It was an effort to unseat or destabilize the Trump administration, the president personally, but actually his entire administration. And we've never seen anything like it. This makes, pick your favorite scandal, Watergate, Whitewater, whatever. It makes all that look like Keystone Cops. This is a very sophisticated, very thought out, not just lawfare in the sense of using law enforcement and the legal system, Department of Justice and FBI, but also the intelligence apparatus, like we've never seen before. The thought experiment I like to use with people is take the same caliber of persons in the Department of Justice and the FBI, the same rank, authority, the same kind of, assistant secretary type folks, lift that up, move it over, and drop it into the Pentagon. People would call that a coup. I mean, we don't have tanks in the street.
If generals and colonels were talking about wearing a wire and removing the president, you would call it a coup pretty easily.
And there's no tanks in the street, and obviously there's an enormous difference. But I'm talking about the same sort of caliber and power being exercised in a way to unlawfully go after the president and his entire administration. One thing that I would like to raise for our discussion also, I think is very important, and I'll close with this, and that is there's a very important text message from Lisa Page to Peter Strzok in September of 2016. And the context for the text message is Strzok asks Lisa Page, hey, what are you doing? Or words to that effect. She reports back very excitedly that she's preparing talking points for Director Comey to go brief the president on what they're doing. And the quote from Lisa Page is, quote, POTUS wants to know everything we're doing, close quote. That POTUS, of course, is Barack Obama.
Yeah.
And I will take Lisa Page at her word. It's a off-the-cuff communication with her paramour. She's excited. She's getting the director prepped. I want to know, what did Obama know? What did he approve? What did he tacitly nod his head for? What did he explicitly authorize? This entire, it's a tragedy. It's a scandal we've never seen before constitutionally. This rests entirely on Mr. Obama and his administration. It starts with them, and we want real accountability. Let's get Mr. Obama under oath.
Well, you know, it's a good segue because both the discussions about the dossier and investigating the so-called investigators. So the infamous ambush that Comey had the infamous ambush that Comey did against then President-elect Trump just before he was inaugurated, where he confronted him with the dossier. Turns out the FBI was nervous, saying, well, it looks like you're trying to blackmail him. Well, telling the truth, I guess, was no hurdle to getting
No, but
something.
it was the thing to do so that Clapper could go tell CNN.
Right. But before that took place, there was a meeting at which that ambush was discussed in the Oval Office with Barack Obama, Vice President Biden, Brennan, I recall,
Yep.
Susan Rice,
Sally Yates.
I'm sure, I don't remember if Sally Yates was there, but Comey was there, obviously, and they all talked about the dossier and going to visit the president-elect with it. And based on what Comey said, the president said, good luck, have good luck with that. So, and then if you've read Simpson's testimony, and on top of what Obama knew, what did Mrs. Clinton know? Simpson was asked on the Hill, what did you tell your clients about this Russia info, this intel? And he refused to answer. He cited some privilege. I don't know what the privilege is, you know, political hack privilege. I don't know what the privilege is. But Hillary Clinton's never been asked about this in any serious way. Certainly her lawyers haven't been asked about this. So there's this category of folks that haven't even been asked by the media about their involvement in this. And I want to, I guess, your reaction to that as to why is it the top leader, the White House of President Obama have been immune from scrutiny here?
It's funny.
And of course, Carter, you were in the sights there. I can't imagine the president didn't know that there were 3 or 4 FISA warrants targeting you.
Well, it's funny you asked that. A couple days later, on January 10th, the morning of January 10th, 2017, I went to a breakfast at the Council on Foreign Relations. It was actually an on-the-record breakfast that was live streamed. And Lisa Monaco, who was working in the Obama White House at the time, you know, and there was a big article that day in the New York Times by Robbie Mook, you know, the Clinton campaign manager, and he's talking about Watergate. And, you know, I asked her questions about the FISA process, and, you know, there's been various allegations. Of course, she completely, you know, dodged the question, but I tried asking that question directly, and I've been asking, you know, I've put in FOIA requests, Privacy Act of 1974 requests, great questions. I have no idea. So,
Carter, one thing that is interesting is that we have Andy McCabe, his desk calendar, showing that he was running over to the White House to brief Lisa Monaco. So there's a direct connection there.
Do you know the date?
Off the top of my head, no, but we do have those records.
But, you know, we talk about the deep state, but isn't this really the top state we need to be worried about at the DOJ, FBI, CIA, et cetera, the Obama White House, Victoria?
Oh, yes, but there still is a deep state.
Right.
I mean, because I've seen it where you know, things are being ordered to be done, and people just take their time to
That's
do
why
it.
there's
that
this
people,
that's why there's this declassification order, because of the obstruction from
well,
seditious
that's
individuals inside the
a
administration.
deep state and a head state. That's Chris Wray. I mean, Chris Wray was stonewalling the Attorney General, for goodness sake. And so you can envision Bill Barr saying to the president, you want me to uncover this stuff? I got to have people give me the documents. Chris Wray, I've been told by various people, wants to protect the FBI because if it's known what they really did, he thinks it's going to go bye-bye. I say you've got to clean it out to protect it. We've been COINTELPRO, you know, way back in the days when it was just being used against bad guys. You know, they were overdoing bad guys.
Can Durham and AG Barr trust the FBI to allow it to be involved in these investigations? Is there a conflict there?
I'm sure they can find some agents there. I mean, of course there's honest agents, but I was pointing out during my intro, how about those agents that surrounded George Papadopoulos when he landed? What were they told? Why was this guy going to have 10 grand on him?
Well, just think about the Papadopoulos operation, Chuck, where you had the FBI, this woman who we don't know who she worked for. Maybe it was the FBI, maybe it was CIA, it was a government operator. So it's taking place overseas. So you had the FBI, the DOJ. Stephen Halper was paid with Defense Department funds. That's, you know, he made money from the Defense Department. Obviously, an overseas operation like that would involve the State Department. So you had this multi-agency operation targeting a presidential campaign. It certainly highlights the need for the Attorney General to be able to access all of these agency documents quickly to figure out what went on in that specific spy case. But get back to the address that obviously. But I mean, you're a media guy. I guess Barack Obama is going to put you on his sole interview list. But am I wrong in suggesting the media hasn't asked President Obama one question about this, more or less?
Yeah, to my knowledge, he's not been asked this, and I don't know if he's just been cleverly avoided it or if the reporters don't want to take the initiative to ask him these questions. To jump back real quick on George Papadopoulos, and then also tying in, you mentioned Joseph Mifsud. Devin Nunes has raised a really interesting point in a letter, I think last month, he sent to the FBI and Attorney General. He wants to find out, you know, Mueller claims that Mifsud was a Russian asset. But we know for a fact that Mifsud was working for institutions that have much stronger ties to Western intelligence agencies. So Devin Nunes raised the question of, okay, well, if Mifsud is a Russian asset, as you claim, then that creates a huge counterintelligence problem for all of these Western institutions and our own State Department, who Mifsud visited in 2017. Creates a huge counterintelligence problem. So they need to tell us, like, which is it? What is he? Either he was a Russian asset, which there's really no evidence to support that, then that's the problem. And if he was not a Russian asset, if he was affiliated with Western intelligence, what was he up to? What was he doing? And so George Papadopoulos, I mean, there were so many just really strange interactions that he had. I mean, that's understating it. I mean, he had Halper, and then you mentioned the Azra Turk, the alias Azra Turk, who we don't know if she's FBI, if she's CIA.
But if you're Attorney General,
Yeah.
and you sit there and you say, I want to know tomorrow morning who's Azaturk.
Yeah.
I want to know if Mifsud, shouldn't you be getting those answers
Yeah.
the very next morning?
It's pretty clear he
somebody?
hasn't been getting the answers. People should understand that the Attorney General seeking this authority from the President suggests the corruption continues, that he's facing corruption internally, that he needs to try to bypass by getting authority to declassify information and get over the bureaucratic roadblocks that have been put in place to
And
protect
that's
these
why
agencies from
he was
scrutiny.
blessed with this authority.
Let's hope he uses it. Chris, you've made the point.
He will.
Yeah, well, you know, and then you could use it and still have the fight. And AG Barr needs a lot of prayers and support because he's going to continue to face strong opposition even with this authority. As we know, the president saying something should happen, as far as the deep state is concerned, that's something to be taken into account, but is not just positive.
For the media going along with this would never happen.
Right. Well, that's
I
true.
mean,
Well, the media is complicit.
But I mean,
too much of the media is complicit.
they're
Obviously, some
chiming
media
in
isn't.
on trying
Chuck,
to,
I don't know everything you've done, but yeah.
well, they're trying to taint Bill Barr. I mean, you go listen to CNN for 2 minutes if you can stand it, or MSNBC. It's like, well, Bill Barr, is he to be trusted with classified information? Oh yeah, he worked at the CIA. He's got his clearances. I bet he is.
I'd like to can I make a point on that, actually? Sorry, I know you're, just real quick. So John Brennan came out on Friday after the declassification authorization. Brennan comes out, and the talking point, all of a sudden their talking point was, well, we have to worry about sensitive sources and methods being leaked. Now, first of all, there's no indication that Barr is just going to willy-nilly, as Brennan used that term, willy-nilly, just release these crown jewels. He's not going to do that. But also,
it's the same hysteria that they invoked with the Devin Nunes
Exactly.
4-page memo, and they would have you believe that they're going to, explain to the world intelligence collection methods, which is not the case at all.
Right.
All they're going to do is expose and reveal what bad actors did what things and communicated with who. And the notion that that would somehow endanger our intelligence collection capability does not pass the giggle test.
But the Mueller report cannot be appreciated unless its entire the
Right.
grand jury material is released.
The hypocrisy, I mean, it is the definition of hypocrisy.
Chris, I want you to emphasize the point you've made previously about the reasons they might be nervous about this material coming out, which is the unlawful surveillance of domestic political operations.
Yeah, so this is a really important thing, and it seems like it's down in the weeds, but it's not. So there's an executive order governing intelligence activities. It's Executive Order 12333, and there's one section in there called Section 209, and there's a specific prohibition in this section about undisclosed participation in U.S. organizations in the United States. That's a long title, but basically what it means is that intelligence and law enforcement, principally intelligence, cannot run penetration operations against U.S. entities. This is sort of an emotional, legal intelligence hangover from Students for Democratic Society in 1968. The FBI convinced the Army to run assets, to run agents against SDS, a militant group that blew up post offices and campuses and stuff. So there was this problem in the 60s that was reformed. Intelligence services were told you cannot penetrate U.S. organizations in the United States. Well, what do you think these guys were doing at FBI and DOJ? What are the Peter Strzok's and Comey, what are they doing? Well, they're going after a political campaign, right? And they're using intelligence assets, techniques, tradecraft to do so. So there's a prohibition on that. One way around it is to get an attorney general letter. And do you really think they're going to go to Loretta Lynch and get a letter authorizing them to run an operation against the Trump campaign? No, for a variety of reasons. They didn't trust her. They didn't want a piece of paper floating around authorizing that. There's lots of reasons not to do it. So how do you do it? How do you run an operation against a political campaign? And the answer is you create a foreign counterintelligence event. And how do they do that? Well, he's sitting at the end of the table, right? They bring you to the United Kingdom to go to a conference, right? Papadopoulos again overseas. And so they have this event, this activity overseas that they then say, oh, look, we're reacting